Thanks so much for joining us today. God wants to do so much for you and through you, and we'd love to hear about it. Take a moment to send your story to stories@parkerhill.org. And if you'd like to partner with us financially, you can do that by going to parkerhill.org/give and choose the giving option that works best for you. Well, thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoy today's message.
This is a series called The Comparison Trap. It's all about the way that we compare our lives to other people and how that affects how we live. Well, my name is Dan. I'm one of the pastors here at Parker Hill. We're excited that you're joining us. You might be joining us live or by way of video in Dixon City, Wilkes-Barre, or online. We're glad that you're here with us. Now, comparison in our lives, it's a killer, isn't it? See, when we compare our lives to other people, our joy dies, our generosity shrinks, and our hope dims. I love how Pastor Andy Stanley put it. I think he nailed it when he said, there is no win in comparison, none at all. And so in this series, we're talking about comparing our lives to other people in different ways, and we've attacked it from a few different angles, and today we're gonna look at some more. This one from 2 weeks ago was the fastest way to ruin something special is to compare it to someone else. Then last week we said, contentment ends where comparison begins. And this week, we're gonna talk about this little word, envy. Envy. Now, according to the dictionary, envy is a feeling of discontent with regards to another's possessions, success, or luck. You know, how life is going for them. We could just say envy is wanting some part of someone else's life. We've all done it. It's that little voice inside of us that when we see something that we like in someone else's life, we kind of want some of it. And so we say things inside to ourselves like, oh man, I'd love to have a car like that. Or maybe for you it's a truck. Or I would love to have kids like that, or maybe a spouse like that, or friends like that, or a promotion like that, or money, or strength, or popularity, or success, whatever it is. I just wish I had a little bit of that, a little bit of someone else's life. Now, Proverbs 14:30 says this, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. Contentment brings peace, but envy can eat us up inside, which is curious. Because why is it that what someone else has can affect us so powerfully? I mean, they didn't take anything from you. They might not even know you. So why is it that what they have affects you so much? And to understand this dynamic in a new way together today, we want to talk about another word, and that word is rubbernecking. Rubbernecking, all right? And you've probably seen this in action before. This is when you're staring at something of interest, and you kind of, your vision, and you get distracted a little bit. You've seen this, right? The accidents caused on the highway by slowing down and people rubbernecking. This maybe has happened to you like this. You're driving along and you start to see on the highway in front of you, it's strewn with all these car parts. And so you kind of get closer and closer. Then you see an 18-wheeler and 3 vehicles over in the median. And as you pass by, you start to, what's going on there? And it affects your driving. Or maybe you're on a long trip and you're driving along and you notice that the left lane, the opposite of you, is really slowing down, slowing to a stop. And as your lane, which is perfectly clear, comes up closer to it, you start to see, there's a multi-car pileup over there in their lane. No wonder they're stopping. And then you realize people are starting to slow down and your lane's almost stopping. There's nothing in your lane, but people are, whoa, check it out. Rubbernecking. Or maybe you're driving at night and you see some lights up ahead of you and it seems like there's a lot of emergency and police vehicles up there, and you get closer and then you notice there's like 6 to 7 vehicles out there, and you start to slow down and go, whoa, what's going on there? That's rubbernecking. Now, there's a point in rubbernecking where your curiosity becomes a liability. And if you continue to stare, your life and the lives of the people around you will be in danger. The point when it becomes dangerous is when you're looking becomes distracting. When looking at what they're doing keeps you from looking at where you are going. That's the problem. And at that point, when you start to move past and you are about to be distracted so that you can't see where you're headed anymore, you have to make a decision. You have to make a choice. Keep looking or start driving. And the same is true in life. So you can envy their story or live your own, but you cannot do both. You can keep watching them, or you could focus on you, but you can't do both. I know. Sometimes you just notice something. It's very interesting, fascinating, and a little bit nice, and you'd like to have a part of that in your life. And so it's hard not to compare. And the point when comparison becomes dangerous is when your looking becomes distracting. When looking at what they're doing keeps you from looking at where you are going. And at that point, you have to make a choice. Keep looking or start living. You can envy their story or live your own, but you cannot do both. Envy can stop you from living your story. And every Christian was rescued on purpose, for a purpose. But you won't fulfill that purpose if you are busy comparing. And so I want to do two things together today. And the first is to prove to you that you, yes, you, have a unique story. And the second is to show you how to live it. And so we're going to dive into a part of the Bible called Hebrews, because it was written to a group of Christians that must have known a ton about Hebrew history. Most likely these were Jewish Christians. And they were facing this intense circumstance that was driving them toward a decision point, whether they would continue to follow God or get distracted and turn away. And they were going to miss God's best if they gave up on God. And so the writer, we don't know who wrote this one, the writer wants to encourage them to stay the course because it will pay off in the end. And so we're going to jump into chapter 11, where we find what many have called the Faith Hall of Fame. Now, I lived in Ohio for a good portion of my life. In Canton, Ohio, they have a Pro Football Hall of Fame. And according to Wikipedia, the Hall of Fame enshrines exceptional figures in the sport of professional football. And just to see how many football fans we have in the room here today, who do you think has the most? So let's look at your options here. Who has the most inductees in the Hall of Fame? Do you think it's the Dallas Cowboys, the Chicago Bears, or the Philadelphia Eagles? Go ahead and tell your neighbor what you think it is. Yeah, I heard it. The answer, the Bears. That's right. Chicago Bears with 34 people in the Hall of Fame. Now, in the Hall of Fame, there are displays that commemorate the greatest players and coaches and others associated with the sport. There's memorabilia like jerseys and footballs and cleats, all from pivotal moments in the game. And there's these bronze busts of all of the inductees spreading throughout the room like you see there. And as you walk the halls, you'll see things like the ticket stub from the NFL's highest scoring game, the Redskins versus the Giants in 1966. The Redskins won the game 72-41. And you also notice that the games used to cost $5, which I wish was the case today. Or you'll see the former Eagles QB Tommy Thompson's championship ring from 1948. Now, God has a Hall of Fame like this. I like to call it the Hall of Heroes. And it's right here in Hebrews chapter 11. I want you to walk with me through the halls as we look at some of the highlights, because there's Abraham, the father of faith. 11 verse 8. It says, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Or Sarah, his wife. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was unable to bear children because she considered him, that's God, faithful who had made the promise. Or there's Moses, the great prophet and leader of his people. It says, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, all the treasures of Egypt that were at his fingertips, because he was looking ahead to his reward. And on through this one chapter, the list goes, listing God's Hall of Heroes. A lot like the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Every corridor showing or commemorating a great moment, a great athlete, a great symbol of success. But there is one major difference between the Hall of Fame and God's Hall of Heroes, and don't miss this. You do not get into God's Hall of Heroes by your great deeds and accomplishments. Unlike the Hall of Fame, you don't get in by what you do. You get in by what God does through you. These all got in through grace, acting by faith. They get in because of God. And how do we know that? How do we know that? Because these people were really flawed. Abraham, we just mentioned, he was a coward. Sarah, a doubter. Jacob, a cheater. David had an affair. Noah got drunk. Jonah ran in the opposite direction. Moses had a temper. Miriam gossiped. Samson was a womanizer. And Rahab was a prostitute. And yet these are the ones in God's hall of heroes because, and don't miss this, they ran their race by God's grace, just like we are to do today. And so the writer is trying to help us see how God has worked throughout history, always taking ordinary, messed up, maybe even jacked up people and taking those ordinary folks and doing extraordinary things through them because that's how God works. And so as he writes, I just imagine him, he's running out of space because, parchment costs a lot and ink did too. And so he's summarizing all these things. He gets to this section, he goes, okay, I don't have time to list it all out. I'm just going to summarize some of these epic things that these Hall of Heroes people did. And so I just want you to listen as I read verses 32 to 38. He says, and what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskin and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. Epic, right? This is an amazing description of God's Hall of Heroes. And other than that being a really cool summary, why is this in the letter to the Hebrews? I mean, he spends an entire chapter recapping the history of the Jewish people for Jewish people to read. I mean, they already knew these stories. Why spend the time, the ink, and the parchment? Why? Well, chapter 12, verse 1 tells us, where it says this, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, the Hall of Heroes, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let's run with perseverance the race marked out for us. So why did the writer want this to be so intensely clear in their minds? Why do you want to bring it back from their memories and they heard it growing up all the time? Why do you want them to just see it right before they see this? Why all of that before he says this? Because they're next. Because yes, that's the Hall of Heroes, but they're handing the baton to you. The race marked out for us. It's like the writer is walking through the Hall of Heroes and he's getting really excited. He says, oh, check this out. Look here. This is Moses' staff, like the staff, the one that he had at the burning bush. Oh, this is so cool. Oh, this is the one he took and he dipped into the Nile and it turned to blood. This is the same staff that he held up in front of the Red Sea and it parted. I mean, that's the staff. This is awesome. Oh, look at this display over here. This is incredible. You see this red cord? That's from Rahab. Now people know her story, but man, it was an epic moment in God's history. I mean, she was the one woman in her nation that was willing to stand up when everyone else was refusing God. She had some faith in God, just a little bit, and she acted on it and saved her whole family. Whoa, what's this? Over here, oh my, this is David's booth. Look at this thing. Whoa, that's the sling. That's the one that he took out Goliath with. This is so awesome. That's his harp, the one he went on the Psalms tour with. That was a good tour. Yeah, that's the one. And the crown, the one he finally got to wear after all that time on the run. Oh, look at this one over here. It takes you over to a display case and it's empty. And you're thinking, after all that, why this? And as you get a little bit closer, he shows you the plaque on the front. And you lean in close and you see that it says, your name. Your name. And here you are in the middle of the who's who of God's awesome, epic accomplishments. Here's all the who's who, and there's a spot for you. See, this is the Hall of Heroes, but you're next. And for many of you, as soon as I said that, you said, sounds really nice, but not me. And you'd be right. You and I would not belong in the Hall of Heroes if it depended on our accomplishments. But we walk by faith, and we get in by God's grace. And he works through ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And what I'm not saying here is that you will have the same life of prominence that some of those names I listed have. But you can lead a life of significance, impacting people for eternity. So look at this long line of ordinary people, and you're next, because you have a race to run. You have a race to run. You saw the words, let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Your race is not Moses' race. It's not Daniel's or Sarah's or Rahab's or Joseph's. Your race is not your sister's race or your coworker's race. It's the race marked out for you. You have a race to run. And the evidence in the Bible is overwhelming. It tells us that you have been chosen and blessed with every spiritual blessing, that you've been given everything that you need for life and godliness, that you've been uniquely designed for good works, and you've been placed in this place, in this time, to do something that God created you for. You have a purpose because you have a race to run. Not their race, your race. Not their family situation, your family situation. Not their income, your income. Not their personality, your personality. Not their struggles, your struggles. It's unique to you. It's the one he has written for you. It's the race marked out for you because you have a race to run. And comparison is a distraction from the race that he's marked out for you. And so you can envy their story or you can live your own, but you cannot do both. And so let's learn about how to run our race. In Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, it's going to show us how. Look at verse 1 again. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Here the author is using an analogy of a race, really common. He's saying, you see all these gold medalist winners, they went before you, now you're the next one to win the prize. It's your time to run. And you know how it is with runners, you want to remove anything that would slow you down. And so he points out two things that they need to throw off because it will throw them off on their run. And the first is to throw off everything that hinders. Throw off everything that hinders. The runners of that day took their running seriously. Back then, they were so serious about running and removing every little weight that they ran naked, really. Today, runners don't do that, but they have highly engineered suits and shoes to remove any weight or drag that could slow their race. And notice that we're not talking about bad things per se. He's not talking about sin. Sin comes later in the verse. Here he says, throw off everything that hinders. These are the things that hold us back, even good things that hold us back. These are the things that divert our attention or sap our energy or dampen our enthusiasm for God. Any excess weight that slows down your race. That's the stuff that we're supposed to throw off. It's not necessarily bad, except when it keeps you from God's plan for you. Now, last year, I was headed to a conference with a few other staff members. And we're going to fly from here to Texas, and Brady Funkhauser, one of our pastors at the Clark Summit campus, was on the trip with me. And so we go through all of security, and we check our bags, and we're sitting on the plane on the runway. And up ahead, we can't really tell what's going on. Nothing seems to be happening. In and out comes the flight crew, and they seem to be whispering to each other in some hushed tones. And then eventually, they give an announcement over the speaker.
Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, we are sorry for the delay. Our aircraft is overweight today, and we cannot take off until we lighten the load. Brady Funkhauser, if you would please come forward, we'll put you on another flight.
True story, all right? I'm not saying anything. I'm just relaying the facts to you. I guess they figured that if they could get Brady off the airplane, then it could finally fly. All right? They knew that they had to remove some weight to take off. They knew when the weight had crossed a certain threshold and would hold them back. And I want to make sure you're hearing me today. I'm not saying that you need to get really religious and remove all the fun from your life. The hobby that you love, don't do it. That boat you want to buy, you shouldn't buy it. The house you're working so hard to get, don't go get it. I'm not saying that. You see, what you're into can enhance your life and your mission, or it can hold you back. And so like the airlines, you have to pay attention to the weight these things are putting on your life, because you cannot fly until you let them go. So are your goals at odds with God's? Is your hobby keeping you from hearing God's voice? Is your passion pulling you away from being generous? Is a good thing keeping you from a God thing? So you can't ignore these weights, because you have a race to run. So first, throw off everything that hinders. And second, throw off the sin that so easily entangles. Now, sin is just missing the mark. Sin is when you do the wrong thing or you don't do the right thing. That's just missing the mark. That's sin. And all of us struggle with sin in our lives. You, me, all of us. It's a battle that we fight because we want to become more like Jesus. But I want you to notice a couple of details here that I think that are really helpful, because the writer talks about the sin, not a sin or any sin, the sin that so easily entangles. It's like he's targeting the bigger sin in your life, maybe the one you're most weak against, the temptation that you fall for most often. See, we are all tempted by all sorts of things, but we are not all tempted by the same things equally. One person may be more likely to give in to gluttony or laziness. Another person may be more likely to exhibit pride or violence. Another person might be able to eat whole bags of chips in one sitting. I don't know, maybe just me. So, to run your race, you need to pay attention to the sin you struggle with the most, the one that easily entangles you. And when you get honest with yourself about your weaknesses, you'll take some extra precautions so that it doesn't wreck your race. I'm not saying go overboard or go crazy, but I am saying be aware of the weight. And that if there is a big enough thing, maybe it's time for you to take some action. And so maybe you need to avoid some people or circumstances as needed for a time. Or maybe you need to put some extra barriers in your life or accountability in your relationships. Or you might be extra careful about any hint of sin in that one area because you just know you have a weakness for it. And I can't tell you what your precautions should look like. That's your call. But pay attention to the sins that you struggle with the most. The first several times that you fall into that temptation, you could call it a mistake. But after a while, after 10, 20, 30, 100 times, you have to call it what it is, a decision that you're making. And eventually, it's not a mistake. Eventually, it's the sin that has so easily entangled you. Entangle. Because sin can hold us back from the race that we have to run. Sin can get its tentacles around us and choke the life out of our run. So run your race by throwing off everything that hinders, by throwing off the sin that so easily entangles. And after we get rid of what's unhelpful and sinful, we're to do one more thing with our race. Look at what it says. It says, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. The last thing we're supposed to do to run our race is to focus on Jesus. Jesus, who is the pioneer, the one who started your faith. Jesus blazed the trail that we follow. Jesus paid the price for our freedom. This all started with Jesus. He's the pioneer. And so we're to look at him. Jesus, who is also the perfecter, the one who carries it through to completion. Jesus will finish what he started. He puts you on this journey. He will get you to the end of it. He started it. He's going to finish it. Jesus is the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Envy is wanting part of someone else's life, but looking to Jesus like this erodes our envy. Because when we look at Jesus, we see someone who joyfully endured suffering that he did not deserve, so that we could have riches and blessing in our life that we do not deserve. That's the perspective that we need. That's the Jesus that we need to see. And it erodes the envy in our lives. The whole time I was growing up, my dad was a carpenter. And that meant he got up really early and worked really hard. and hot summers and bitter cold winters. And my first job out of college was as a student pastor in New York, and I remember one morning in the dead of winter, darting from my car through the freezing temperatures to the door of the church, and I'm pulling out my keys to get into the office, and the metal of the keys was so cold that it burned my hand. It hurt, right? And I'm just struggling as fast as I can and breathing, trying to get it in there. And as I start to get it in there, because I'm ready to rush out of the cold and into the warmth inside, it hits me. I get to go inside to the warmth because my dad hung out in cold temperatures like this all the time and worked. He endured suffering that he did not deserve so I can experience the blessing that I do not deserve. And how much more so with Jesus? Jesus ran his race so that we could run ours. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. When we look at Jesus, our envy erodes. Jesus joyfully endured what he did not deserve so that we could have what we do not deserve. And so I can't get bogged down in comparison. I can't get bogged down in wishing I had someone else's life. Look at all that he's given me. Look at how much he has loved me. Look how personally he has picked me out, chosen, remember? Chosen, placed in this place and this time to do what he has purposed for me. We've got more important things to do than compare. You say when you see Jesus on the cross, man, it's absolutely, positively, without a shadow of a doubt, true that I have been rescued on purpose, for a purpose. That's no accident. So you can envy their story or live your own, but you cannot do both. So when you are tempted to compare, I want you to think of these traffic cones. I want you to think of traffic cones, all right? Not exactly our favorite thing to see, right? But when you see a traffic cone or a larger, barrel one out on the highway, I want you to start thinking about comparison. I want you to think about our time here right now, because traffic cones are designed to help you stay in your lane. And when you see them, you know where you're meant to go. And when you run over one, you know you are off track. So instead of getting frustrated when you see these things on the road or the highway, I want you to think of something else. I want you to think of your race. To think of the race that God has marked out for you. That's your lane. That's where you're supposed to be. That's where God has meant for you to go. Not into that lane, not into that one, but the race that he has marked out for you. So when you see these, I want you to remember that God is writing an epic story and you are a character in it. He's got a race marked out for you. And so when you start to notice their amazing vacation and you'd like to get over in that lane, I want you to remember and say, no, not my race. And when you see if they're smarter than you and they look really impressive when they talk, and you want to swerve over in that lane and compare and envy, I want you to, no, not my race. This is my lane. This is my space. This is what God has for me. I will not rubberneck. I will not get distracted. I've got an important race to run. And so when you see how well they're doing financially, I want you to stop. No, not my race. And when you realize how smart they are and how impressive it is, I want you to say, not my race. And when you start to think to yourself, wouldn't it be nice to have that or to have that or have that or have that, say, stop and say, not my race. Got my own. Marked out for me by the one who made me. It's a little embarrassing, but just this past week, I'm sitting in a crowded auditorium watching one of the biggest communicators in the country do his thing. And I start to compare. And obviously, I don't measure up. But something else starts to happen. It's a little sneaky, a little insidious. I started to think, okay, where was this guy when he was my age? How do I compare to that? Of course, I'm not where he's at today, but where am I at now? You know what I had to do in that moment? Not my race. Comparison is just a distraction. What would I benefit from comparing? Oh, I feel better about myself. I feel worse about myself. I feel better about myself. I feel worse about myself. What would I benefit from comparing? Nothing. Comparison is just a distraction, not my race. Let us run with endurance, perseverance, one step after the other, the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus. So when we look at Jesus, we think, he picked me and he's given me a place and a mission to accomplish. Am I doing that? Not do I have what they have or want what they have? Am I running my race? He says, I've entrusted you with a mission. So don't get caught up in comparison. You know you have lost sight of the race. If comparison and envy are growing in your heart. God's saying to you, you don't have to be them. Be you. And walk by faith. God has designed all of us for a life of significance. The question is, will we run? Will we do it? And if your answer is yes, I can think of 4 ways that maybe a next step is available for you. And the first I want to emphasize is baptism. I mean, what better way to celebrate what God is doing in your life and that you've become a follower of him and you want to follow him and not get distracted than to openly and publicly declare that you are a follower of Jesus in baptism. It's a party. It's awesome. You will not regret it. And so maybe you just need to head to the Next Steps area after the service today or head to the website, watch a short video from Mark, and sign up for baptism. Or something that's near and dear to my heart is the fall retreat for our students. You heard about this a little bit earlier, but man, one of the best things you can do to hear God clearly, to know his race for you and not get distracted, is to get away for a little bit. And in high school, one of the most important things I ever did was get away to retreats like this one, to hear God talk to me, for him to tell me who I am and who he wants me to be, so that when I got back to the craziness of everyday life, I stayed the course of what he wanted for me. And so if you're a student or you're a parent, this is a cannot miss event. Sign up for the fall retreat. There's a book that I want to recommend to all of you. It's called Epic by a guy by the name of John Eldredge. It is super short and small. You'll love it. It's an epic, the story God is telling and the role that is yours to play. I want to encourage you to grab this. And the reason why is as you read this, you'll start to understand your race, your place in God's story. Immensely helpful. You can get it wherever books are sold. And let me just encourage you to grab 1, 2, or a whole case and share them with your friends and family. It's like what I did, all right? And the last piece of advice or next step that might be for you is that when you're tempted to compare, I want you to turn it into a prayer. I want you to start a new practice. Don't tune me out here. Don't underestimate the power of this small prayer. And the next time you want to compare to someone else and you feel pulled in that direction, when envy is tearing you up inside, do this. Pray for blessing for them and ask for God's leading for you. Pray for God's blessing for them and ask for God's leading for you. This is a powerful way to break away from the comparison trap. In conclusion, I want to leave you with a final thought. Because the thing about comparison is that as you start to compare, you start to be defined by what you are not. You create a list that says you're not talented enough or intelligent enough or handy enough or good enough. And a list can define you. And what we need to do is to define ourselves by who God says we are, not what comparison says we are. And he says you were designed with a purpose. You were made for a race. You are a masterpiece in the making. And so you are who God says you are.